Peter Andreas Thiel was born on October 11th, 1967 in Frankfurt am Main, West Germany, into a family whose restlessness and technocratic ambition would shape his view of the world as a place to be hacked rather than inherited. His father, Klaus Friedrich Thiel, was a chemical engineer who spent the late 1960s working on ammonia synthesis plants in the Ruhr Valley, and who considered the American aerospace boom the true frontier for a technically trained mind. In 1977, Klaus accepted a position with Cleveland-based Swindell Dressler, and the family, Peter, his mother Suzanne, and a younger brother, Patrick, immigrated to the United States, beginning a migratory childhood that would include stints in suburban Ohio, South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal coast, and finally Foster City, California. By the time Peter entered 8th grade, he had attended 7 primary schools, accumulated a drawstring bag of library cards, and developed the free-floating identity common among highly mobile, analytically precocious children. Self-confidence rooted not in place or peer group, but in the ability to solve problems faster than anyone else in the room. Chess became the first domain where that confidence found formal expression. At 11, he spent whole Saturdays in the fluorescent glare of the Fremont Chess Club, rising to peak USCF rating 2341 and ranking 7th nationally in the under-13 cohort. Chess taught him that victory flows not from the calculated accumulation of tiny advantages, the style exalted in mainstream instruction, but from asymmetry, forcing the opponent into uncharted positions where established heuristics misfire. The lesson would become a leitmotif of Thiel's career. Identify an ideological or market space that incumbents misprice because they consider it marginal, then occupy it ruthlessly until it becomes indispensable. He carried that sensibility to Stanford University in 1985. As an undergraduate majoring in philosophy, an unusual choice for an immigrant son of engineers, Thiel drifted toward continental theory, writing term papers on Hegel's teleology and René Girard's mimetic desire, while simultaneously logging thousands of hours with Turbo Pascal on university mainframes. Girard in particular left an indelible mark. The French thinkers claim that societies avert cataclysmic violence by channeling envy towards scapegoats would later inform Thiel's darkest reflections on politics. In his sophomore year, he founded the Stanford Review after a mandatory orientation session encouraged students to rank their identities by oppression score. The paper launched as a 12-page tabloid mocking the burgeoning diversity bureaucracy, but by Thiel's senior year, it had a print budget of $120,000, distribution racks across the Bay Area, and a stable of writers, including David Sachs, who would later constitute the ideological skeleton of the so-called PayPal Mafia. The review sharpened Thiel's instinct for mimetic warfare. Pick an elite consensus, frame it as dogma, attack with superior logic and derisive wit, then harvest the attention dividend. He graduated in 1989 magna cum laude and decamped immediately to Stanford Law School, partly because law seemed the canonical path to intellectual power in Washington, partly because the opportunity cost of further study was low during a recession. It took a single summer clerkship in Manhattan's Sullivan and Cromwell to convince him that billable hours were a throttle on curiosity. He resigned after 7 months, citing tedium, and accepted a 1-year clerkship with Judge James L. Edmondson on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, where he drafted opinions on patent exhaustion and interstate banking, but, more important, discovered the thrill of writing language that possessed binding force in the material world. When offers from white shoe firms arrived, he rejected them and instead followed William J. Bennett, former Secretary of Education, to Washington to help craft speeches on virtue and cultural decline for an aging Reagan coalition, a position that paid half as much as corporate law, but plugged Thiel directly into the capital's ideas for higher economy. Washington disillusioned him even faster than Manhattan. K Street breakfasts where lobbyists traded talking points for cocktails of ego and access convinced him that change would not come from legislation, but from code and capital, which could outrun democratic inertia. In 1993, after reading Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash and Michael Lewis's Liar's Poker in the same feverish weekend, Thiel flew to New York, joined Credit Suisse as a derivatives trader, and spent 18 months writing Pascal scripts that priced long-dated currency options. There he saw, in quantitative finance, a prototype for software. Small teams with asymmetric knowledge could leverage mathematics to move billions. He left in 1996 with US$$1 million in trading profits and returned to California, just as browsers were turning the consumer internet into the greatest unregulated land rush since Oklahoma. That summer, he launched Thiel Capital Management, an arbitrage fund that wrote out of the money puts on mid-cap tech stocks with Columbus Day expiries, exploiting a calendar quirk in settlement cycles. The trades delivered a respectable but unspectacular 18% annualized return. What mattered more was that the fund served as social API into the early Silicon Valley brain trust. In a nondescript office on University Avenue, he met Max Levchin, a Ukrainian emigre who demoed a Palm Pilot cryptography tool capable of splitting a numeric token across two devices, so that neither alone revealed the secret. Levchin envisioned digital cash for the dawning era of personal organizers. Thiel saw a wedge into the financial rails Visa and MasterCard had neglected because average e-commerce transactions were below their per-swipe cost threshold. In December 1998, Thiel injected $$250,000 of his own money into Confinity, taking the role of CEO and offering Levchin the title of CTO. Their first product allowed Palm users to beam payments via infrared, but the breakthrough came when engineer Luke Nosek wired the backend to email addresses, bypassing hardware limitations. Confinity rebranded the service PayPal and launched a referral bonus that paid $$10 into any user's new account and another $$10 to the inviter. Burn rates soared to $$10 million a month, peaking at 70% of on-hand cash, but the network effect was instantaneous. By February 2000, PayPal had 1.5 million users and a growth curve that bent upward like a second derivative. Fraud threatened to gut gross margin. Carders in Russia and Indonesia exploited stolen numbers to generate phantom accounts. Yet Thiel insisted on growth first, arguing internally that a payments firm with scale could always raise its rake or be acquired, while a fraud-free service with no users would die quietly. The dot-com crash arrived 6 weeks after PayPal announced a Series C led by Nokia Ventures. Capital markets froze, forcing Thiel to slash referral bonuses, replace the Visa rails with the cheaper automated clearinghouse, and deploy the first neural net fraud engine in consumer finance. The gamble worked. By spring 2002, PayPal was transaction positive. The company went public on NASDAQ in February at $13 a share, and eBay, terrified of losing its escrow backbone, bought PayPal in July for $1.5 billion. Thiel, who had taken a salary of $1 in 2001, cleared $55 million after taxes. More significant than the money was the diaspora of alumni. Elon Musk, Reid Hoffman, David Sachs, Jawed Karim, Steve Chun, Chad Hurley, Keith Rabois, Relof Botha, and Levchin himself. Collectively, they would build Tesla, LinkedIn, YouTube, Yelp, Square, Slide, Yammer, and Khosla Ventures, saturating the valley with a PayPal-ish ethos of blitzscaling and vengeance against incumbents. Flush with capital and restless for a problem worthy of his newly expanded ambition, Thiel joined four engineers: Alex Karp, Joe Lonsdale, Stephen Cohen, and Nathan Gettings, in 2003 to found Palantir Technologies. The pitch to In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture arm, was audacious: a platform that could parse fragmented data sets, terrorist finance records, call detail logs, visa applications, and surface hidden relationships without violating civil liberty constraints baked into American law. The result was Gotham, a system built on graph theory and Bayesian inference that allowed analysts to drag and drop nodes on a canvas to watch probabilistic links bloom like neural dendrites. Palantir's fortunes waxed with a war on terror. By 2009, it had contracts with the NSA, FBI, and SOCOM. By 2020, it was processing COVID-19 supply chain for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Critics see dystopian surveillance. Defenders see a rare example of Silicon Valley applying its prowess to national security rather than photo sharing. Thiel's own dichotomy: libertarian vocabulary married to statecraft execution, remains unresolved and perhaps intentionally so. Parallel to Palantir, Thiel launched Founders Fund in 2005 with Ken Howery and Luke Nosek, promising to back companies that move the world forward. The first letter to limited partners was half manifesto, half Jeremiad, lamenting that the future imagined in 1960s science fiction, flying cars, orbital hotels, had devolved into the incrementalism of social media. Over the next 15 years, Founders Fund invested in SpaceX, Stripe, Palantir, Oculus, Asana, Airbnb, Planets Labs, DeepMind, and Neuralink. Thiel's skill lay in underwriting extreme technical risk that other firms self-censored as too hard or regulatory minefield. He negotiated SpaceX's Series C at a valuation compounded on Falcon 1's performance targets, accepting catastrophic downside in exchange for upside on Mars colonization. He wrote the first outside check for Elon Musk's brain-computer interface company after a single demo of a rodent moving a cursor by neuronal pulses, calculating that even a 1% chance of success justified the asymmetric payoff. The single greatest return, however, came from a $$500,000 angel investment in the Facebook in September 2004. Mark Zuckerberg, then 20, wanted advice on scaling servers. Thiel offered cash and a board seat. Over years, he coached Zuckerberg to resist acquisition offers from Viacom and Yahoo, arguing that social graphs, unlike search queries, conferred an unassailable moat once a critical mass was reached. When Facebook went public in 2012 at a US $104 billion valuation, Thiel sold a portion of his stake for more than US $1 billion, famously timing the sale to the SEC lockup expiration within minutes, then reinvested proceeds into his Mithril Capital Growth Fund. Politics, once a sideline, re-entered violently in 2016. Thiel donated US $1.25 million to Donald Trump's presidential campaign and spoke at the Republican National Convention, declaring, "We've let Silicon Valley build a better future, but for some reason our government can't." The endorsement of a candidate scorned by most coastal elites triggered paroxysms in the valley. Several accelerators temporarily boycotted Thiel-capitalized funds. Thiel remained unrepentant, arguing Trump was a statistical black swan whose victory was possible precisely because media elites believed it impossible. He joined the presidential transition team, recommended Ajit Pai for the Federal Communications Commission, and helped select Peter Navarro for trade policy. Yet he declined any cabinet role, preferring to influence strategy through protégés embedded in the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the Defense Innovation Board. The Gawker saga cemented his reputation as a billionaire willing to weaponize capital against critics. Outed as gay by the gossip site in 2007, Thiel began clandestinely funding lawsuits against its parent company. The decisive blow came in 2016 when Hulk Hogan won a US $140 million judgment for invasion of privacy, forcing Gawker into bankruptcy and auctioning its archives to Univision. Journalists decried the precedent of litigation finance silencing the press. Thiel replied that Gawker had trafficked in ruinous gossip without consequence and that free speech does not immunize deliberate torts. The episode revealed a trait overlooked by both admirers and adversaries. Thiel plays iterated games, but is willing to allocate resources on decadal horizons for a single vendetta. His philanthropy mirrors his contrarian investment thesis. In 2010, he launched the Thiel Fellowship, paying US $100,000 to teenagers who forego or drop out of college to pursue entrepreneurial or scientific experimentation. Critics condemned the program as an attack on higher education. Supporters note that alumni include Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin and Figma co-founder Dylan Field. Thiel funds the Methuselah Foundation, Sends Research, and the cryonics nonprofit Alcor, where he is signed up for neuropreservation. He has poured tens of millions into seasteading projects, floating micro-city prototypes in international waters, arguing that humanity needs jurisdictional competition to spur policy innovation. In 2022, he moved his personal residency to New Zealand, leveraging a citizenship he had quietly secured in 2011 after pledging to build a luxury lodge near Queenstown that doubles as an emergency self-sufficiency bunker stocked with solar arrays, a hydroponic farm, and a book-matched marble chess table. Since 2021, Thiel's attention has split between biotechnology and geopolitics. He co-founded Vala Atomics, a venture deploying compact fusion prototypes based on field reverse configuration reactors, betting that China's cobalt stranglehold will push the West toward non-lithium energy stores. He backed Boreal Therapeutics, which uses CRISPR-based prime editing to regenerate optic nerves, partly an act of filial devotion, as his mother suffers from macular degeneration. He also seeded Endural Industries, an autonomous defense startup led by Palmer Luckey, providing drone swarms and virtual border fences that merge machine perception with Palantir data fusion. On the geopolitical chessboard, Thiel has embraced what he calls crypto-Reaganism, a strategy to contain Chinese techno-authoritarianism through decentralization. In speeches at the Hudson Institute, he warns that the People's Bank of China's digital yuan seeks to export surveillance monetary standards worldwide and advises the U.S. Treasury to accelerate stablecoin legislation to undercut Beijing's influence. Founders Fund has since amassed positions in Bitcoin mining operations powered by stranded methane flare gas and finance protocol teams working on zero-knowledge rollups to enhance privacy. By 2025, Forbes estimated Thiel's net worth at $21 billion, spread across Palantir, Founders Fund carry, Bitcoin held in an LLC called Vesper 5, and a diversified portfolio of biotech stakes. He lives primarily in Pacific Heights, San Francisco, in a 17,000 square foot modernist mansion whose library contains first editions of Carl Schmitt's Political Theology and J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion. The house also features a secure basement theater calibrated for 20-seat vibration frequencies, where he hosts private screenings of Christopher Nolan films for visiting statesmen. He married longtime partner Matt Danzeisen in a private ceremony on Anguilla in 2017 and remains a practicing Catholic who attends Latin Mass at the shrine of St. Francis of Assisi in San Francisco. Thiel's detractors see him as an oligarch orchestrating a post-liberal order where sovereign individuals warp markets and policy to personal whim. Admirers portray him as a 21st century Medici, redirecting wealth toward high-variance moonshots neglected by risk-averse institutions. He seems content to nurture the ambiguity, quoting from Lord of the Rings at a 2024 Churchill Club event. "The wide world is all about you. You can fence yourselves in, but you cannot forever fence it out." For Thiel, fencing in or out is the wrong paradigm. Borders, whether intellectual, political, or biological, are invitations to seek the exploit that turns constraint into asymmetry, risk into optionality, and opposition into oxygen for ideas that offend the status quo.